Mom, the trans men are fighting again. Seriously, why do I keep getting into beef with other trans masks? Warning, please do not harass anybody mentioned in this video. We are going to be civil here. Content warning for mentions of transphobia, ableism, and homophobia. So, it's definitely been a while. A lot has happened since I last made a commentary video on another YouTuber. I turned 18, I finished my first week of college as of writing this script, and I reached over 500 subscribers. Now, if you've been an audience member in the commentary community, you'll likely notice that a lot of content creators find out about bad videos from their audience telling them. That is how I found this creator. I was itching to do another commentary video, something simpler than a critique on a 3-hour movie, and asked you guys to bring me some garbage. And hot damn, you guys are like cats dropping off a dead rat on my doorstep, and I love you for it. So who are we covering today? Godless Snowshoe is a furry creator whose content is based around his opinions, primarily around gender and religion, although he discusses other topics on his channel. His more popular videos are on the subject of xenogenders. Now, some of you may be wondering, what are xenogenders? Xenogenders are essentially a non-binary identity that lies outside of human ideas of gender. Put it simply, they describe their gender based off of their emotions surrounding it, rather than the typical male-female spectrum. Some examples include fire gender, an identity based around a constant state of change similar to a fire, gender void, which is based around an absence of gender, like a void, and digigender, an identity based around digital items such as files. There's a bit of controversy surrounding their identity and the validity of such. My opinion? Meh. Gender is a feeling. If you feel the best way to describe your identity is through animals, plants, or stars, okay. I, nor anybody else, can dictate how you identify, because we can't see your feelings that would give you a reason to identify as such. Plus, I'm of the opinion that a person's personal comfort matters and should not be considered wrong unless it is causing actual harm to people. Even then, I'd have to question what exactly harms them, because I've seen people claim to be hurt by the dumbest things. Sorry ladies, but I don't think a trans man having a mastectomy actually harms women with breast cancer. So, we'll cover Godless's video, What's the Deal with Xenogenders? I'll discuss where he goes wrong in the video, and I'll even bring on a friend later to help me explain a few things in better detail. Without further ado, let's begin.
So this is the video that I know I'm gonna get shit for. Please excuse if you can hear my rabbit digging in the background. I tried to get him to stop and he's been doing it for 20 minutes. I'm going to be going over the scientific inaccuracies of xenogenders, the harm that they can do to the trans community, and essentially how I feel is the appropriate way to react to that. I would like to state right off the bat that I am not true scum. I do not give a fuck about that argument. It's semantics, it's arguing over definitions. I think it's stupid. I align myself more as an exclusionist, but I literally do not care about the true scum too cute argument.
Yeah, that didn't last too long. Expect a pattern of Godless saying how much he doesn't care about something, only for him to showcase the exact opposite. Also, defining yourself as an exclusionist within the LGBT plus community, not a good look, given that opens up a whole array of questions of what exactly you're excluding. For instance, some of the examples provided by Urban Dictionary for what being an exclusionist entails are asexuals and aromantics are not part of the queer community, and or that they are not spectrums. Non-binary people shouldn't be referred to as gay or lesbian. Pronouns equals gender, and that identities such as pansexual, omnisexual, and polysexual are biphobic. Oh no. When you define yourself as an exclusionist, people have to wonder what exactly you mean by that. Do you believe that asexuality and aromancy aren't part of the community? Or that somebody like me, a demisexual, isn't actually asexual? I'm not saying you do, I don't know that, but marketing yourself as an exclusionist, yeah, a lot of people aren't really going to continue watching the video if you immediately isolate a large group of your audience who are most likely other queer people.
I also have no issue with non-binary people. This is exclusive to xenogenders, and I will also not be talking about neo-pronouns in this. So if you want a video on neo and noun pronouns, let me know, but I will just be ignoring any comments conflating the two subjects and assuming I have similar opinions on them, because my opinions on neopronouns and noun pronouns are much more based in personal opinion than they are in objective fact.
See, this is also where your label of being an exclusionist causes issues. As I said earlier, one of the examples was that they believe pronouns equals gender. If you did believe that, why would neo/noun pronouns be different from xenogenders? This is nitpicking, but I'll explain how he kinda doesn't follow that logic later on.
I will be using the definition of xenogender from the LGBTQIA wiki, which is the only time I will be referencing this wiki, as it is extremely unreliable and has absolutely no sources other than which user on random sites coined certain gender names. I am only using it here because these people self-identify with this wiki often, and I think it is the only time that it should be used is when explaining what these people believe. According to the wiki, a xenogender is defined as a gender that cannot be contained by human understanding of gender, more concerned with crafting other methods of gender categorization and hierarchies, such as those relating to animals, plants, or other creatures/things. I will just start with my issue of this and its relation to gender. The idea that gender is a social construct is a very misrepresented one. Gender, as it is presented, is a social construct. Gender roles are a social construct. The idea of a binary is a social construct. However, that does not mean gender is not an innate biological feature of a human.
Gender, as it is presented, is a social construct. The gender binary is a social construct. Gender is not a social construct. Fantastic.
When I say biological, I mean neurology. I do not mean that sex equals gender, nor do I mean that there are only two genders. I am literally trans.
Just want to put this out there, being trans does not exempt you from thinking that there are only two genders. There are trans people who do not believe non-binary people are valid, something your own argument would imply had you not specified your stance, but we'll get there when we get there.
What I mean is that brain sex has been proven. If you want to argue that it's a flawed, study or whatever, or that it's more nuanced than that, that's fine, but I'm going to need scientific peer-reviewed sources that discredit the studies that I will be linking in the description that are equal or more up to date, because in my 2 years of arguing this, I have not seen one study on it. Not one. The closest thing I have gotten was an article that the person clearly read the first line of from the World Health Organization, which was actually talking about discrimination and sexism against women, which just defines gender as a social construct, although it is clear it's talking about gender roles, as it later goes on to talk about how women are oppressed in workplaces and paid less, as well as the higher rates of sexual violence and such, and domestic abuse that women go through.
Whew. Boy, let's go through this. First, brain sex has been proven. Sex is not the same as gender. My guy, we are literally trans. Our whole existence is based around our gender, not relating to our sex. To put it in simpler terms, sex is biology, while gender is more psychology, sociology. While your sex may influence your gender identity, it does not dictate it. One can be born male, female, intersex, but gender is where things get really fuzzy. I think most of the confusion surrounding the difference between the terms is due to transgenderism not being publicized for years, so it didn't occur to scientists or writers that there was a difference because, well, nobody changes their gender. Obviously, something that is untrue. And you said you wanted studies on gender being a social construct? So let's bring some. According to the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, sex refers to a set of biological attributes in humans and animals. It is primarily associated with physical and physiological features including chromosomes, gene expression, hormone levels and function, and reproductive sexual anatomy. Gender refers to the socially constructed roles, behaviors, expressions, and identities of girls, women, boys, men, and gender diverse people. It influences how people perceive themselves and each other, how they interact and act, and the distribution of power and resources in society. Want another one? Hell, here's an article from the Yale School of Medicine. In the study of human subjects, the term sex should be used as a classification, generally as male or female, according to the reproductive organs and functions that derive from the chromosomal complement, generally XX for female and XY for male. In the study of human subjects, the term gender should be used to refer to a person's self-representation as male or female, or how that person is responded to by social institutions on the basis of the individual's gender presentation. In most studies of non-human animals, the term sex should be used." End quote. That last part most likely put in there as animals don't exactly have a concept of gender. Oh, by the way, here's another article that is from the World Health Organization that is not discussing sexism and discrimination against women. Hell, even one of your own sources separates the idea of sex and gender. Fun fact, that same article also denotes that people don't have to have gender dysphoria to be trans, so I think that also blows your trans medicalist views out of the water when it's in your own goddamn sources. We aren't even 5 minutes into the video, and we've already disproven one of his biggest talking points being gender isn't a social construct. Which it is. This is gonna either be really long or really short.
I will also be addressing later in the video the idea that xenogenders are for neurodivergent people, usually using autism as an excuse, and as a diagnosed autistic person, I find this argument disgusting and scapegoating. We will get to this later. I am just leaving it there so that if you don't finish the video, you acknowledge that you did intentionally not watch that part of the video. I want to start with just proving my point and showing some sources that brains are gendered, that I am not just pulling this out of my ass. The first study I want to go over is an AI with the predicting people's gender identities, including trans people, based on fMRI scans. They grouped it into 4 groups, which that being cis and trans, women, and men. They were classified with accuracies ranging from 48 to 62%, exceeding chance level at 25%. And I quote, "Our dimensional gender perspective captures 4 distinguishable brain phenotypes for gender identity, advocating for a biologically grounded reconceptualization of gender dimorphism. We hope to pave the way towards objective data-driven diagnostic markers for gender identity and transgender individuals, taking into account neurobiological and behavioral differences and integrative modeling approach." This is one tiny portion of many articles which study not only brain sexual dimorphism, but including transgender people. I often hear the argument, oh, well, these studies aren't done on trans people. They're just showing that brains are gendered. However, I have many studies linked, as well as some I am still working on reading. I just like to read my sources, unlike many of these people, that study trans people and cis people to compare them.
That's the article that points out how people don't need to suffer from gender dysphoria to be trans. Funny thing, the first sentence of the abstract says that gender identity is subjective, meaning it's based on feeling. Don't you worry, I already put too much work into annotating this article. You're gonna get a detailed reasoning as to how Godless's own source proves him wrong. So how the study was done was through brain scans showing resting state functional connectivity, or RSC, basically signals spouted from the brain when you're not doing anything stimulating, and questionnaires based on what gender stereotypes they found appealing for themselves. The questionnaires used were from the BEM Sex Role Inventory, or BSRI. These questions aren't based on physical standards for stereotypically masculine and feminine traits, but rather social and psychological traits, such as cheerful and affectionate for feminine traits, assertive and athletic for masculine, as well as traits associated with neither gender. I took the test myself and ended up being classified as androgynous, so that's something. Anyways, the introduction has an interesting point I highlighted that I would like to share with you, being gender dysphoria becoming an outdated term. This mental health diagnosis entails severe discomfort arising from the discrepancy between gender identity and biological sex. Importantly, being transgender does not equate with a mental health condition, and not all transgender persons suffer from gender dysphoria. Instead, the proper term is rather gender incongruence, something that Godless later claims is the same as gender dysphoria, which it isn't. Gender incongruence is only identifying as a gender outside of your assigned sex, while dysphoria is the heavy discomfort from your assigned sex. Basically, our identities don't have to revolve around our suffering or lack thereof. The study continues on to explain that the transgender participants, 46 in total, split evenly between trans men and women, the same for the 46 cisgendered participants, were all officially diagnosed with gender dysphoria, meaning that despite the article acknowledging that one doesn't have to have dysphoria to be considered trans, the test was still done only on people with the disorder. Not to mention, something I found particularly interesting given the subject matter of this video, for all cisgender and transgender patients, further exclusion criteria were neurological disorders, other medical conditions affecting the brain metabolism, and first-degree relatives with a history of mental disorders. You guys know what autism is? A neurological disorder. So you don't think that were the study done again with people on the autism spectrum, the results may be different and show differing brain phenotypes? You know, like the possibility of xenogenders. So, what did the study show? Well, lucky for you guys, it has some visuals. These are the 4 brain phenotypes that came from the brain scans. Notice the distinct difference from the cisgender brains and the transgendered ones, especially regarding trans women. The trans men's brains, while somewhat similar to the men's, aren't the same, and the trans women's brains are heavily different from all the others. If brains are gendered, well, the way that Godless implies, that would mean that trans people, women especially, don't qualify as either men or women. They'd be a separate gender altogether. But that's not what the study shows. In the conclusion, it states that the idea of men and women are essentially inaccurate ideas of gender identity categories. An interesting quote regarding this being, transgender subgroups were identified with prediction accuracies comparable with men and women, and were not systematically misclassified as skewed towards male or female. These results clearly support a dimensional gender perspective that captures 4 distinguishable brain phenotypes for gender identity. And since trans women and trans men were not primarily misclassified as either men or women, these 2 groups constitute distinct gender subtypes, which are associated with unique brain phenotypes. Thus, applying a simple binary gender variable may incur an oversimplification that does not accurately capture the existing spectrum of human gender identities. So your own article says that the idea of a binary gender spectrum is oversimplifying the real spectrum. For fuck's sake, the conclusion states that additional gender identity subtypes might exist. You know, like xenogenders. Not to mention the flaws in using this for your argument, such as the study being on transgendered men and women with diagnosed dysphoria and not, you know, non-binary people. Because xenogenders are a non-binary identity. Hello? Did you not read your own sources? I mean, I figure you just skimmed it, considering it makes it clear that gender identity is subjective, i.e. a feeling, something you're arguing against, in the fucking abstract. It's the first sentence you see after the title. My god!
As well as one study I have linked at the very bottom of my sources on bigender people.
The study linked at the bottom of your sources is called Transsexualism, a different viewpoint to brain changes. The term transsexual generally being seen as outdated, which I don't blame people for viewing it as such because the wording implies that it is not transitioning one's gender, and rather the sexual attraction to trans people. A nitpick, I know, but I am a little bitch.
This study shows that bigender people have a higher brain plasticity. Now, I will note the way that this article describes bigender does seem to align more with gender fluid, being described as bigender is a recently formed subcategory of transgender, describing individuals who experience a blending or alteration of gender states. Which, to me, sounds like a little bit of a mixture of bigender and gender fluid. But regardless, I would just like to define their terms going forward. The article, in very simple terms without me trying to pronounce complex neurology words, which I did once and had to re-record, states that essentially most bigender people have experienced what they call alternating gender incongruity, essentially meaning fluctuating dysphoria, as well as experiencing social and body dysphoria, call it incongruence, dysphoria, whatever you want, they use both words in this, at a similar level and rate to binary trans people. It states that it is linked to their understanding to an unusual degree of essentially switching which side of the brain is more active, corresponding to which part of their body they are conceptualizing. It has also been noted that bigender people have a more drastically higher rate of bipolar disorder, which has been linked to hemispheric switching at a different rate than normal. It is also noted that it can trigger different hormones in bigender individuals, although they have not done conclusive research on this, it states. Essentially, too lazy didn't read. Bigender people have higher rates of neuroplasticity.
And the article also makes note that one of the hypothesized reasons for said neuroplasticity is because of the higher rates of bipolar disorder. Something you literally just mentioned. But apparently that doesn't matter for your argument.
Now, with all of the sciencey talk out of the way, me giving you a basis essentially for brains being gendered. Again, I have way more studies in this. They will be linked below. I just don't want to subject people to me reading snippets of scientific studies. Go read them yourself.
I apologize that you guys had to be subjected to me going into detail about the snippets he did not.
They're all open source, I believe. But with that established, as well as non-binary people being scientifically proven, before anyone goes, well, what about non-binary people? Which was the whole reason I went into that section. It is safe to assume that a concept of gender that does not at all fit into the concept of gender, which I don't know how to word it better than that. Gender that is not gender is not a thing. Gender is a spectrum. Yes, I think we can all agree with that. But using autism as a parallel, autism is a spectrum. That doesn't mean every disorder is on the autism spectrum. It means that there is a variety of ways to experience this. However, those ways are not infinite and are not in some way constricted by different required criteria. There is still a definition for it, even if experiences widely vary. Being a xenogender does not share any common traits of being trans, except for, if you want to say, just the literal definition of identifying as a gender you weren't born as. However, they are not real genders, so I wouldn't really say that counts.
Hold on. Let's just go through this one by one, okay? With that established, as well as non-binary people being scientifically proven, where? You mean bigender people? Okay, they are under the non-binary umbrella, but that isn't all non-binary people. What about agender people? I mean, you say gender that is not gender is not a thing. So did you mean to say that some non-binary people are scientifically proven? But at the beginning of the video, you said you don't have problems with non-binary people. Yet here you say that gender that is not gender is not a thing. Agender people are entirely based around lacking a gender. But I didn't see you throwing a hissy fit over them. Now, this isn't me saying that you lovelies don't exist. I absolutely believe you do and that you are valid. However, I am pointing out his double standards. Next, you use autism as a parallel for gender. The way this is worded, it's confusing. Autism is a spectrum. That doesn't mean every disorder is on the autism spectrum. It means that there are a variety of ways to experience this, however, those ways are not infinite, and are not in some way constricted by different required criteria. Yes, autism is a spectrum, as is gender. However, I don't believe these two can be compared, and I'll say how in one sentence. Autism exists. Yeah, autism is an actual physical thing. It can be shown, it has actual characteristics. Gender, once again, is a social construct. A transgender man like myself doesn't have defined characteristics from me identifying as a man that make me a man, as opposed to the characteristics of my sex labeling me as female. Autism is constricted in its criteria because it actually exists and reality has a limit. Meanwhile, gender is an idea and goes as far as the human brain can allow. Hell, if you compare autism and gender, that would imply that gender that is not gender would be a thing because people without autism exist, same as people without a gender identity. Being a xenogender does not share any common traits of being trans, except for if you want to say just a literal definition of identifying as a gender you weren't born as. That's literally the trait of being trans! That is why we are trans! We identify as a gender we weren't born as! That's literally the one thing all of us have in common! However, they are not real genders, so I wouldn't really say that counts. No genders are real! It's all an illusion! The universe is a hologram! Buy gold!
Now, obviously, there's been no studies done on xenogender individuals because these are not consistent identities people use. They are things people stick with for a year, maybe 2 years, usually as a teenager or a young adult. And there is a reason that these tend to be transitional identities, either realizing you're cis and didn't understand what gender meant, or realizing that you are non-binary or binary trans and that you also did not understand what gender meant.
There's been no studies done on xenogender individuals because these are not consistent identities people use. Or they're still relatively new. As well as there not being any studies on agender people, so there's that. Also, things people stick with for a year or two, usually as teenagers or young adults. Citation needed, give me them statistics. Also, funny thing you said about it tending to be transitional identities because people don't understand what gender means. What about those who identify as binary trans and identify with a xenogender? Remember how I said I'd have a special guest on later? Well, it's later. Please welcome to the floor, Valentino. We will be conducting an interview with him and with questions based on Godless's points around xenogenders and his claims.
Voodoo is a very horrible, terrible thing. Hate the devil's lettuce.
That'll probably be cut out, but
Yeah, but
please introduce your, including your pronouns and what socials you'd like to be advertised in the video.
Cool. Hi, what's up? I'm Tino, or Valentino. I don't really care. I'm usually under as Twebu or Teeny Tino on like anything, so yeah.
Okay. What is your gender / xenogender identity?
Yeah, I'm a trans guy, he him pronouns, but also got a lot of the funky fresh other pronouns. I don't really have a specific kind of label. I'm just kind of chilling, you know. So he, him,
Yeah.
void, ghost pronouns, and that stuff's pretty cool.
Hell yeah. How long have you identified as a xenogender person?
Ooh, well, when I first came out as trans, like late middle school, I'd say. I originally just kind of identified as non-binary because I was like, I know I'm not a girl, but like I don't know what the fuck else I am, so this works. Sorry,
Mood.
wait, am I
Honestly,
can
mood.
I curse?
Yeah, you can curse.
Okay, cool. Sorry. But whenever I realized, I think I'm a man, but like not quite entirely, but like mostly a man. It was so probably I'd say 3-ish years now at this point. Cause
Oh damn.
yeah, I think that's about right.
It's like about as long as I've known you, I think. Hell yeah.
I'm cool like that.
What? Yeah. Also, what does gender mean to you?
Gender is a very complex thing, and to me it's more so the combination of your representation of yourself and how you feel, because gender and sex are obviously, two different things, super cool, but just as much as sex is a spectrum in terms of going male, intersex, female, sexual organs or whatever, gender is also a spectrum, and it's not inherently related to that, and it's more so how you feel, what you identify as, what your brain is, because I don't know if I'm rambling, but for me, gender is a lot more brain-powered than determined by your physical characteristics or your looks or how you're perceived, because, and that goes for cis people too. I mean, you can have someone who is a cis girl who is very, very comfortable in their identity as a woman, but is very tomboyish, but that perception doesn't make her inherently a guy either. It's just your identity, how you feel, and what you are comfortable with, and what makes you happy,
Oh yeah. Okay. bit of a personal question, but have you been officially diagnosed with autism?
No, but ADHD I have.
Okay.
I've been diagnosed with gender dysphoria as well, if that is relevant.
Okay. Do you believe autism affects how anybody view and understand gender?
Yes, 100%. Because,
Okay. No, keep going.
sorry, as someone
No, you're good.
who, you know, is autistic, it has definitely affected my perception of my own gender and of socialness, because already social norms, social, like, interactions is not something I process as a neurotypical person would. And hand in hand with that, with gender perception, it's definitely aids in the disconnect from gender norms to how, being raised AFAB, because it's like, I didn't the what was pushed on me to be as an AFAB person, obviously I already didn't connect with because I wasn't a girl, but it was also hard for me to process because it's like, why does that matter? I don't understand all these social things. Why does it matter? Which definitely also aided in my kind of ability to process my gender identity, because I felt a lot less pressure on myself to kind of quote unquote, I guess, fit in with what I was supposed to be, if that makes sense. Because that's not how I processed it. I still don't, like, gender norms, social norms, it didn't make any coherent sense to me, because there shouldn't be you're this gender, this is the parts you were born with, therefore make me a sandwich. Like, obviously, yeah, that's fucked up either way, but yeah, and so definitely aided in, and it sucked, but helped in my ability to understand myself, helped in my ability to be more open with that and understand myself a little better, because I didn't inherently have the same processing of gender as a neurotypical person would, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense, but,
Yeah.
like, being autistic is going to impact your perception of things, impact how you process things, which is not a bad thing. It's just you process things differently, you understand things differently, and it does suck a lot of the time, does suck sometimes. You got all that sensory stuff that goes on too, and a lot of other shit. Autism is not all hunky-dory all the time, but it's also very interesting to think about in terms of gender, because it definitely, like, I feel like if I was neurotypical, I would have come out a lot later in life. Which, I don't know if that's inherently what you were asking, but that's kind of how I don't know, that's kind of how my brain worked.
Well, it's more along how the guy kind of pushed the narrative that autism in no way affects how you view and understand gender.
Ha! Sorry.
And he keeps saying that. He kept saying, like, xenogender people use autism as, like, a scapegoat for being
Okay.
science denier.
Let me build off of that, because
Go off.
being autistic, again, your brain functions differently than a neurotypical person. Like, just point blank. It has its pros, it has its cons, but that is point blank. Your brain functions differently. You are going to process things differently. You are going to have a different understanding of things. And again, that aids itself into gender, because gender is so fluid. Gender is very much a social construct, very much, like, already difficult to process and understand. And being autistic, it's like, my gender identity, especially when it comes to, like, neopronouns and the pronouns that I use that aren't just strictly he, him, it's going to impact like how what's the word? What I feel like falls into my gender identity. And it's not an excuse. It's not like it definitely does impact it, because you're going to have a different perception of things, and that includes gender, and that includes your identity, and not even just in gender either. Being autistic very much impacts just your identity as a whole and how you process your own identity, because it's like, it's who you are as a person, it's how you function, it's how the world around you is seen. And these things that are built from society, from social aspects, are just kind of stupid.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The next question is basically from something he said in the video, which is, do you believe autism means you are incapable of understanding gender on the same level as an allistic person?
No, not at all. Just because you understand something differently, or just because you have a different way of processing something, doesn't mean you are not understanding it as an allistic person would. Because if I'm in a situation where, like, this is gonna seem off topic, but hear me out. Like, if two of my friends are in an argument, right? I can still see both sides of that situation. I can still completely understand where each person is coming from and their emotions in that situation. That doesn't mean I would react the same way or process that situation the same if I was in their shoes. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
But like, go ahead.
sorry.
You're good.
Understanding the concept of gender differently as an autistic person doesn't inherently mean that I still can't understand how an allistic person processes gender, and why my understanding of it in my, like, identity would be confusing or odd to them. Because, yeah, like, I get it, you know, I'm a little funky, but that doesn't... Does that make sense? I'm rambling as fuck, but, like, it doesn't... It kind of feels like the implication is almost like, if you're autistic or neurodivergent in any aspect, then you will be incapable of understanding an allistic person in any aspect, which is kind of really stupid. I don't know if that makes sense, or what I don't even think that was he was trying inherently to say, but it feels like it. And if anything, I feel like my neurodivergency aids itself to an almost painful amount of understanding other people and their processing of things. Like, yeah, lol.
The reason he said that was because, as he put it, xenogendered people were trying to put out that they were incapable of understanding gender on the same level as an allistic person, without screenshots or anything that showed that a conversation like that happened. So he could have been somebody who didn't know what they were talking about, or it could have been him misrepresenting the conversation. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah.
Just
because it's, again, having a different understanding, because I guess I won't ever be able to be allistic. I won't ever be able to not be neurodivergent. So I guess technically I wouldn't be able to be in that shoes of someone and 100% be in their head, know how they process gender. But also, on the flip side of that, like I was saying, like, I have a very different concept and processing of gender and my own gender and how that relates to my identity. However, that doesn't mean I still can't understand the perception and idea of how an allistic person sees gender roles and sees gender identity. Because I can understand where it comes from, I can understand the viewpoint, I can understand how society has shaped it and how an allistic person's brain would process gender in a different way that doesn't include like the xenogender umbrella and those in neopronouns and all of and those kinds of terms, because yeah, sure, cool, but I guess my point is, being autistic, and specifically in this regard, most of the time you're going to process gender differently than an allistic person would and a neurotypical person would, but that doesn't mean that you can't, that I can't understand where someone is coming from, because those are two very different things, is having a different processing of a situation and not understanding another way of processing situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that is all the questions I have for today. If you would like to stop the recording.
There is no neurological way for your gender to feel soft and fluffy like a cat. It just doesn't connect. Gender is essentially a sliding scale between male and female in your brain. Whether that scale moves around, like in the last study we talked about, or stays in place as a binary trans person or maybe a gender person somewhere in the middle, it's still there. And it's not black and white. There is more nuance to it. However, there being more nuance to it doesn't mean that it still doesn't have constraints. And I'm not saying, oh, there's a male and a female brain, that's it. Again, the study shows that it is much more flexible than that. It can rotate out of different perspectives depending on how you're feeling, like how it said that focusing on different portions of your body could actually make them use different parts of their brain, that it wouldn't normally do that. But there is still a constraint. Words still have meaning, and flexible or not, gender still has both a scientific and colloquial definition, which olive bread gender does not fit into.
Even just how you're feeling. That's literally what gender is. A feeling. If people relate their gender to the feelings they get from garlic bread or cats, cool. I don't quite understand how, but I'm also not a xenogender person.
Now, I want to get in to autism because I would like to note a few things. One, I am diagnosed autistic. I have been diagnosed since I was around 10 or 11 and was reassessed at 20 for insurance purposes. Two, I do not support self-diagnosis. My previous video is on that. Go watch it. Three, there have been no studies on xenogenders, nor on how neurology, at least that I could find, affects autism and gender in correlation with each other. Now, there are statistics stating that autistic people tend to have higher rates of transness. However, there have not been any studies that I am aware of anyway correlating gender being perceived differently. So until there are studies showing that autistic people cannot perceive gender in the same way as an allistic person, I don't have any interest in that argument.
I don't recall xenogendered people saying autism makes them incapable of understanding gender the same way as neurotypical people, just that their autism means they can see beyond typical gender assigned to humans. See, a big problem I have with your generalization of xenogender people is that it's just anecdotal evidence. Your source is, trust me bro. You're basing everything off of your own experiences, which could be incredibly biased.
Being autistic does not exempt you from neurobiology. It does not exempt you from living in a world with science that explains your experiences in an objective way. It literally has no proof and is scapegoating the autistic community for being a science denier. I don't doubt that these people have experiences feeling a certain way, but these people seem unable to disconnect their emotions and their interests to the concept of gender, probably because this idea has been perpetuated so heavily that being LGBTQ is cool, that it's special, and it wins you oppression points.
Godless Snowshoe thinks the LGBTQ isn't cool. Stone him.
And now I get into where self-diagnosis comes in. I have spoken to dozens of xenogender people, only one of which was diagnosed and used xenogenders. Around 5 who were diagnosed and supported them. Now, don't get me wrong, I have met some. They obviously exist, but they are a minority of this xenogender community being diagnosed autistic or some form of neurodivergent people. And even for the people who are diagnosed, this does still not exempt you from the facts of neurobiology.
Yeah, we'll get into him speaking with dozens of xenogender people later on. Spoilers, I have issues.
If anything, I think what autism and xenogenders have to do with each other is just that they can't easily identify feelings. I mean, I know whenever I was in this essentially therapy group for autistic kids, which was great, we had a feelings chart that we would check in with because it was hard for people to identify it. And we had a bunch of different ways to go about identifying them if we couldn't just pick one off the list, because it's hard to identify your feelings whenever it's hard to identify how other people are feeling as well. So I acknowledge that it may not be intentional, but it's very often misconstruing emotions and interests with gender. Because this idea that gender is a social construct has been so falsely promoted so heavily that people just think the word doesn't have meaning anymore. And that comes at the cost of real trans people.
Cool. I guess since I believe and perpetuate the idea that gender is a social construct, I am affecting real trans people. I'm gonna chalk this up to bad wording, but Jesus, dude, horrible implications.
Now, last thing I want to get into is essentially, how is this hurting anyone? / you just want cis approval. You want to be one of the good ones. I do not care what cis people think. I live in the South. I live in Texas. And I have been out as trans since I was around 14 or 15. I believe I was almost 15. I will be 22 on May 4th. So I have been out for a while. And I was out in the early 2010s. Or mid-early 2010s. I was literally outed as gay in 2011. So, I know what it's like to get bullied for being trans. I know what it's like to get bullied for being gay. And I do not wish that on anyone, xenogender or not.
You facing oppression for being queer isn't exactly evidence that you don't care what cis people think. I'm pretty sure those godforsaken LGB without the T folk have also faced oppression for being queer. Wouldn't that make them actually more likely to pull that gatekeeping nonsense? To get in good graces with the people that hate them out of fear? I don't think you are doing this for cis validation. I'm not a therapist. But this isn't a good way of arguing that point.
But I'm at the point in my life where I just don't care. It doesn't affect me. I don't care unless they're making laws. If someone wants to call me a slur, fucking good for them. Unless it's a law affecting me, I really don't give a shit. I mean, if you've been on one of my live streams, you know I don't ban transphobes unless they're attacking someone in chat instead of me, because I find them funny. It's sad. The reason I say these things is the reason that I post about my other things, like religion, because it is belief without proof at the cost of a minority. And I think it's a similar problem to self-diagnosis, is people who don't belong in this community invading it from the inside and taking up space to where trans people who actually share experiences with each other, be it non-binary or binary trans, cannot communicate because they are so heavily diluted with people who are not trans. Just like how it was hard for me to find a community of people with BPD because there were so many people who didn't even have a disorder diluting that community.
Funny thing about that example involving BPD, I got curious and looked this up. Here's an article from the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Essentially what I found out is about 40% of people who actually have BPD got misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder, as opposed to 10% of people with bipolar disorder being misdiagnosed with BPD. That is incredibly drastic rates of a misdiagnosis. Let's bring some math in. About 1.6% of the US population suffers from BPD. That's about 5 million people. 5 million times 0.4, let's see. That's 2 million people with a misdiagnosis. Gee, I think that maybe, just maybe, the reason there would be a lot of self-diagnoses is because doctors are really shit at giving an accurate diagnosis. You don't think that these statistics would have anything to do with people having more faith in themselves than doctors? Not to mention how expensive health bills can be. But if I keep rambling about this, I'm gonna end up deconstructing the US health system because it is a piece of shit. Anyways, while I do believe you in having issues with undiagnosed people entering the community, I have to wonder how many of them you actually got confirmed were undiagnosed. I mean, did you go up to every person claiming they have BPD and said, "Did you get diagnosed?" And how many of them told you to fuck off? Or did they just not show certain symptoms and you just assumed they were faking?
I don't care if cis people think it looks silly. I mean, I think it looks silly, but that's not why I have a problem with it. There are plenty, I'm a furry. I do things that are weird and silly, okay? But being trans isn't an aesthetic. Being trans is not an accessory. Being trans is not how you feel about your fucking aesthetic, or even people who claim their disorders are their genders. And I get these people don't, like, a cat gender person doesn't identify as a cat. They say their gender relates to cats or feels soft but feisty, or, like, I don't know. Some of them I don't understand how your gender can relate to bread, but, you know, it is what it is. But I don't support belief without proof for anything, and that includes gender. And as a trans person, I am sick of these people pretending that they have the same experiences as me, as many of the other trans people in my life that I care about, or any of the number of thousands of trans people who also do not want them here.
You know where I've heard that before? Being a gay trans man and cis men saying I don't have the same experiences as real gay men. Seeing trans women be invalidated because they don't have the same experiences as real women. Seeing non-binary people being invalidated because there's no scientific evidence and that it's just a new fad. You want to know what I am sick of as a trans person? People in our community gatekeeping and bringing in the most bare bones of evidence and spouting double standards for the sake of demonizing a group. But hey, that's just me.
I also care, as an autistic person, that they are blaming my community for denying reality and invading a different community I'm in. That is honestly my biggest issue with it, is scapegoating autistic people. At least admit you don't have sources and just don't care.
I'll be sure to keep a counter of all the times you say you don't care in this video. Also, hi, I'm the guy who used your own sources to prove you wrong.
Fucking own up to it. If they could own up to it and stop playing victim for 5 seconds, then maybe I would take them seriously because they're owning up to not having sources. But as it stands right now, their community consists of usually adults and older teenagers who will throw buzzwords at you with no explanation, who will give you death threats, who will literally dox you on live streams, who will fucking threaten you because you are calling them out on their bullshit.
Buddy? That's really just online communities in general. Hell, look at what happened with Hogwarts Legacy. Here's a few screenshots. Oh, and here's a post made by a trans radicalist who advocated for Trans Day of Vengeance while holding a gun, only a few days after the Nashville shooting. You don't think you might, just might, be misrepresenting xenogenders based on radicalists and bad faith actors? What if people started doing that to transgender people as a whole?
For the people who identify like this, who are kids, I don't care. If you're 12 and you think you're cat gender, cool. You're gonna grow out of it in a week. But whenever it's older teenagers and adults, which it often is, I have a fucking issue because you should know better. If it's a literal child, I just don't. It's a child. Children are gonna do stupid things. It's whatever. But as soon as it's like you hit fucking 16 or 17, I'm gonna call you what you are and say that you are harming the trans community by being a fucking liar. And a science denier.
Ooh, haven't heard that one before.
Again, sources are in description and I read you some of them. I generally avoid interacting with these people because they are unable to be civil in my experience.
I generally avoid interacting with these people. I've spoken to dozens of xenogendered people. Which is it? Also, I have to wonder if you speaking to them was just hurling insults at each other like toddlers throwing a tantrum rather than having an actual discussion with each other. See, this is why screenshots are so important, because otherwise the foundation of your argument is built on anecdotes, and you'd be better off working with cards. Speaking of screenshots, I got curious and threw out a question on Twitter. I had a poll on my page for xenogendered users where the options were, I have been officially diagnosed with autism, I am self-diagnosed with autism, or I am not autistic. Guess what had the most votes? Boom. Now, while these answers could potentially be inaccurate, this is at least something. Basically, get good, scrub.
Which is why I have gone from my initial approach. If you followed me on TikTok when I started getting an internet presence, I was a lot more toned down. But as I have dealt with these people over the last 2 years, I've kind of realized that there are very few of them who you can reason with or who will give you sources. They have no sense of what a credible source is. I have been sent the Timey dating site link. I have been sent the LGBTQ wiki dozens of times. I've been sent cards written by teenagers. I have yet to be sent one scientific article. One. A single one. And I have talked with dozens of these people. And I don't know if it's because they just don't have any, which I think is very likely, or if they're just so unable to determine what a credible source is that they don't even try and go out of their way to find a good one. So if you use xenogenders, you're not going to call me buzzwords, you're going to give me good sources, and you're going to be civil, I am totally down to have a discussion with you. But both on my main channel and my experiences on other accounts, it consists of you're transphobic, you're ableist, conversation over. I'm just going to yell at you the entire time, regardless of what position you get or how you present it.
See, I have to wonder about this because of your approach in this video being antagonistic. Did you approach in the same way but are trying to pass it off as, I was being civil, I don't know why you'd be so mean to me? Godless, we're on the internet, I can't just take you at your word when all I see is you being a dickhead. Also, real hilarious that you're so adamant about them giving you good sources when your own prove you wrong. That's just fucking funny.
You can come at it in the most sympathetic approach. I've done that. They don't care. They think that you're just trying to be a nice transphobe. A transphobe who just wants to disguise their quote-unquote harmful positions as innocent. And if you come at it harsh, like I am now, you get called a bully, you get called a transphobe, you get called antagonistic.
You called xenogendered people fucking liars. How is that not antagonistic?
And you get called basically everything. And if you come at it actually being a bully, you get the same shit that you give to them and you fucking deserve it. But I have come to the conclusion that I just don't care. I'm not going to go out of my way to antagonize these people or be rude to them, but I'm also not going to censor myself for the sake of the feelings of people who I think are harming two of my communities.
Who you think are harming two of your communities. My guy, people think I'm harming the transgender community because I wear makeup and dresses because that apparently makes me not a real man. People think transgender women with beards are harming the community. Hell, let's even move past what our own community thinks of us and go beyond. Gay people think transgender people are harming the gay community. TERFs think trans women harm the community. Lesbians think trans men harm the community. If it's perfectly fine to antagonize because yes, that's what you're doing, xenogender people because you think they are harming the community, then it's fine for these other communities to do it to whoever the fuck they want because they're not censoring their feelings. You are fucking incapable of seeing how every argument you give can be thrown right back at us.
So if I offend you, good for you, I don't care. If I don't offend you and you want to have a discussion, even better.
Wonder how he feels about me being offended and making a video. Think he still won't care? Given that he made 5 more videos on xenogenders alone, not counting the videos on pronouns and the ones on autism and gender, I doubt it.
Great. I just don't care anymore if I offend people because these people are so sensitive most of the time. I'll say not all of them are. I'm sure there's exceptions. But these tend to be the Twitter teenagers who think everything is offensive. And they're impossible to have a conversation with because you make one little slip up and if the conversation starts going better, boom, you're a demon. Which just makes it extremely hard to have a consistent and civil conversation. So,
oh no, I'm a teenager on Twitter. My argument, there it goes, never to return.
So yeah, that was more of a rant with a side of science at the beginning, but I mean, I really just am very angry about this topic and how, as a trans disabled autistic person, I get called all of the buzzwords when I actually experience those things and don't use them as an accessory.
What fucking buzzwords are you talking about? Do you mean people were calling you transphobic or ableist? Once again, you can be those things while still being trans or autistic. I really get sick of people saying, I can't be transphobic, I'm trans! Or the same thing with autism and ableism. You can be an asshole to your own community. Being a part of it does not negate the harm you can cause. But no, I'm not harming the community by spouting off double standards and labeling myself as an exclusionist, as well as preaching the same arguments as trans folks. It's the genders.
So, if you're using being trans as an accessory, aka a xenogender,
Fuck off.
please reflect on what you're doing to people who actually don't have a choice, who don't use a pronoun or a label because it sounds cute, who use it because without it, they feel bad. They feel like shit.
Assuming that xenogender people don't feel like shit because there's no way that somebody could be experiencing the same pain as the almighty godless. Also, gender incongruence as opposed to gender dysphoria. Read your own damn sources, and no, I am not letting that go.
They can't go out in public without wearing a binder, or maybe they can, and maybe they just get uncomfortable. Getting uncomfortable, even if it just makes you wince a little bit, is a lot more than what these people experience.
Fuck you.
So whether you're a trans person with crippling dysphoria, or a trans person who just gets a little ugh when someone calls you the wrong pronouns, these people don't fucking understand. And if they do, well, congrats, they're probably trans and don't understand what gender means. Gender's not an accessory. Have a great day, guys.
Yeah, this video was pretty bad. As many times as he said he didn't care, he would go on to make more videos on xenogenders, still retaining his stance on it, as well as adding more to it. Remember how I said I'd go into the thing about him saying neopronouns are separate from xenogenders? Well, here's a comment on the video, do xenogenders really hurt anyone? I go by neopronouns, but I don't really take it as my gender, you know? Like fox, fox self, dog, dog self, cat, cat self, like, you know, I identify as an animal on a non-physical level, but I don't use it as my gender, smiley face. Godless responds with, why would you use it as a pronoun when the purpose of a personal pronoun is to indicate gender though? He goes on to say that pronouns are gender, that the entire purpose of pronouns is to indicate the gender of someone. Godless, you're right in that pronouns are gendered, but only some of them in the English language. When you go into other languages such as Spanish, French, German, pretty much every pronoun is a gender. However, in English it gets more quirky. For example, it. It has no gender attached to it, except people do use it as a personal pronoun. Not to mention they can refer to several objects, or a person who uses they them pronouns, or somebody whose gender you do not know. Also, Godless, guess what? I use he him pronouns, and I am not necessarily a man. Yeah, I don't really talk about it that often, but I am gender fluid. My gender and how I express it changes on a regular basis, but I only use he him pronouns because those are the only pronouns I'm comfortable with. This kind of shit is why I only refer to myself as a trans man. One, because my gender usually lies in the man/M-spec area of the spectrum, and two, because I don't want people using any other pronouns for me outside of he, him. TLDR, my gender ranges from guy to not guy with a La Croix flavored dash of woman. My pronouns do not accurately reflect my gender because my gender is more advanced than what words can say, as often is the case for feelings because that's what gender is. Hell, Godless, you say gender fluid people exist in your video, but there aren't pronouns that describe you as gender fluid. Like, you say she, her indicated who you're talking to is a woman, he, him indicated the person is a man, and they, them indicated either the person is non-binary or you do not know their gender. So what if somebody is gender fluid? Like, gender fluid is under the non-binary umbrella, but I use he, him. Like, I am simultaneously in the binary and outside of it. This is why trying to define gender gets difficult. We are trying to accurately describe a feeling, but there are some feelings we are not capable of fully describing. Like, have you ever had a moment where you feel dread, panic, but at the same time, happiness? You could describe that as ambivalence, but that may not accurately describe everything you're going through. Basically, the English language and feelings are absolute shit at working together. Then there's a matter of your sources. The main source you use is Predictive Pattern Classification Examination, and that is the one I tore apart. My guy, if the main source you use goes against your claims, don't use it. I really have to wonder if you actually read it or just skimmed it and only used the part you thought would help your argument. You are either illiterate unless it suits you, or you're a... what was it again? A liar and a science denier? Yeah, really interesting how that turned out. You do not even bother to consider if the people you're talking to are actually feeling these emotions, and chalk up their experiences to, you just want to be a special snowflake. And it is revolting. You have such a fucking misunderstanding of gender, and you're taking it out on the people around you. I am so sick of literally every community that does this, but it hits a special nerve when it's the trans community. We get the fucking short end of the stick everywhere. And to see so many of us do the same to other people within our own community is just... it's just disappointing. Anyways, that's all for today. Godless, if you'd like to make a response, feel free, but hey, I honestly doubt that he'll make it through this video, given that he's already shown that even if people reach out to him with politeness, he shuts them down immediately with a negative attitude, so I really doubt he'll accept a more blunt response. Once again, don't harass people, guys. It's gross. I'm sleepy. And good night.